The power of not reacting. How to control your emotions. The prison of emotional reactivity. Your emotions are not your friend. Let me say that again. Your emotions are not your friend. They are not some sacred inner voice guiding you toward truth and happiness. They are biological reactions designed for a world that no longer exists. A world where immediate emotional responses meant the difference between life and death. But in today's world, your emotional reactions are sabotaging your success, destroying your relationships, and keeping you trapped in cycles of regret and failure. Every single day, you make decisions based on how you feel in the moment. You get triggered by a comment and fire back with something you'll regret. You feel overwhelmed and quit on your goals. You get anxious about a presentation and avoid the opportunity that could change your career. You let anger control your words and destroy relationships that took years to build. You are being controlled by chemical reactions in your brain, and you don't even realize it. But here's what the top 1% of high achievers know that you don't. They have learned the most powerful skill in human existence, the ability to not react, the ability to feel the emotion, acknowledge it, and then choose their response based on logic, strategy, and long-term thinking, instead of the primitive impulses screaming in their heads. This is not about becoming emotionless. This is not about suppressing your feelings or pretending they don't exist. This is about taking back control of your life by mastering the space between stimulus and response, the space where your power lives, the space where your future is determined. By the time you finish this book, you will never be the same person who started reading. You will have the tools, the knowledge, and the mental frameworks to control your emotions instead of being controlled by them. You will learn how to stay calm under pressure, make better decisions when stakes are high, and build the kind of unshakable inner strength that separates winners from everyone else. Chapter 1. The Hidden Cost of Emotional Reactivity. Most people have no idea how much their emotional reactions are costing them. They think it's normal to get triggered. They think it's human nature to lose control when things get difficult. They think that strong emotions are a sign of passion and authenticity. They are wrong, dead wrong, and this delusion is destroying their lives in ways they can't even see. Let me paint you a picture of what emotional reactivity actually looks like in the real world. You're in a meeting with your boss and colleagues. Someone challenges your idea in a way that feels disrespectful. Your heart starts racing. Your face gets hot. The voice in your head starts screaming about how unfair this is, how they don't understand your vision, how they're trying to make you look bad. And before you know it, you're defending yourself with an edge in your voice that makes everyone in the room uncomfortable. You've just damaged your professional reputation over a 60-second emotional reaction. Or maybe you're having an argument with your partner about something relatively minor. They say something that hits a nerve. Instead of staying calm and working toward a solution, you escalate. You bring up past grievances. You say things designed to hurt them because you're hurting. 10 minutes later, you've turned a small disagreement into a relationship-threatening fight that will take days to recover from, all because you couldn't control your initial emotional reaction. Here's the brutal truth that no one wants to face. Every emotional outburst you've ever had has cost you something. Sometimes the cost is obvious: a lost job, a broken relationship, a damaged reputation. But most of the time, the costs are invisible. They accumulate slowly over years and decades until you wake up one day wondering why your life didn't turn out the way you wanted. The invisible costs of emotional reactivity are far more damaging than the visible ones. When you react emotionally in a professional setting, you don't just damage your reputation in that moment. You create a permanent record in other people's minds. They remember you as someone who can't handle pressure, someone who gets defensive when challenged, someone who lacks emotional maturity. And this perception follows you for years, closing doors you don't even know existed. In relationships, emotional reactivity creates cycles of hurt and resentment that compound over time. Each outburst adds another layer of damage. Each harsh word spoken in anger becomes another wound that never fully heals. Your partner starts walking on eggshells around you. They stop sharing their real thoughts and feelings because they don't want to trigger your reactions. The intimacy dies slowly, replaced by distance and guardedness. But perhaps the biggest cost of emotional reactivity is what it does to your own psychology. Every time you react emotionally instead of responding thoughtfully, you're training your brain to be more reactive. You're strengthening the neural pathways that connect triggers to automatic responses. You're making it harder to control yourself in the future. You're literally rewiring your brain to be more emotionally volatile. And here's what makes this particularly insidious. You don't notice it happening. The changes are gradual. You become slightly more reactive each year, slightly quicker to anger, slightly more prone to anxiety, slightly less able to handle stress, until one day you look in the mirror and realize you've become someone you don't recognize, someone controlled by their emotions instead of being in control of them. The research on emotional reactivity is clear and damning. Studies show that people with poor emotional control have significantly worse outcomes across virtually every domain of life. They earn less money. They have higher rates of relationship failure. They experience more health problems. They report lower life satisfaction. They're more likely to struggle with addiction. They have higher rates of depression and anxiety. But correlation is not the whole story. The mechanism is what matters. Why does emotional reactivity lead to these negative outcomes? Because emotional reactions are optimized for immediate survival, not long-term success. When you react emotionally, you're letting your amygdala, the primitive fear center of your brain, make decisions. Decisions that should be made by your prefrontal cortex, the sophisticated reasoning center of your brain. Your amygdala developed millions of years ago when humans faced very different challenges than we face today. Back then, threats were physical and immediate. A predator, a rival tribe, a dangerous animal. In those situations, quick emotional reactions saved lives. Fear made you run. Anger made you fight. These reactions happened faster than conscious thought because speed was more important than accuracy. But in the modern world, most of our challenges are not physical threats requiring immediate action. They're complex social situations requiring nuanced judgment. They're professional challenges requiring strategic thinking. They're relationship issues requiring empathy and communication. None of these situations benefit from primitive emotional reactions. In fact, emotional reactions make these situations worse. When you get defensive in a meeting, you're not protecting yourself from a physical threat. You're responding to a perceived social threat with a reaction designed for physical confrontation. When you lash out at your partner, you're not fighting off an attacker. You're responding to hurt feelings with aggression that damages the relationship you claim to value. When you avoid a difficult conversation because of anxiety, you're not escaping danger. You're letting fear rob you of opportunities for growth and connection. The tragedy is that these emotional reactions feel justified in the moment. Your amygdala floods your brain with stress hormones that narrow your focus and amplify your emotional state. Your heart races, your muscles tense. Your thinking becomes rigid and binary. In this state, your emotional reaction feels like the only reasonable response. Fighting back feels like self-defense. Lashing out feels like necessary confrontation. Avoiding feels like self-preservation. But this feeling is a lie. It's your biology hijacking your judgment. And every time you act on this feeling, you're training your brain to be more easily hijacked in the future. You're creating a feedback loop that makes you more emotionally reactive over time, more controlled by feelings, more trapped in patterns of behavior that don't serve you. Breaking this feedback loop requires understanding a fundamental truth about emotions. Your emotions are information, not instructions. They're data points that can inform your decisions, but they should never determine your decisions. When you feel angry, that's information telling you that your expectations weren't met or your boundaries were violated. But that information doesn't tell you what to do about it. That requires thinking. When you feel anxious, that's information telling you that you perceive some kind of threat or uncertainty. But that information doesn't tell you whether the threat is real or how to respond to it. That requires analysis. When you feel hurt, that's information telling you that something matters to you. But that information doesn't tell you how to protect what matters or how to communicate your needs. That requires wisdom. Most people never learn to separate the information from the instruction. They feel angry and automatically assume they should express that anger. They feel anxious and automatically assume they should avoid the situation. They feel hurt and automatically assume they should withdraw or attack. This automatic equation of feeling with action is what keeps them trapped in cycles of emotional reactivity. The people who achieve extraordinary success in any domain have learned to break this equation. They feel their emotions fully. They acknowledge them. They extract the information. But then they pause. They create space between the feeling and the action. And in that space, they make conscious choices about how to respond based on their goals, their values, and their understanding of the situation. This pause is where power lives. This pause is where wisdom operates. This pause is where your future is determined. And learning to create and use this pause is the most important skill you can develop for success in the modern world. Chapter 2: The Neuroscience of Emotional Control. Understanding how your brain processes emotions is not just academic knowledge. It's practical power. When you understand the mechanisms behind your emotional reactions, you can intervene in those mechanisms. You can reprogram your responses. You can literally rewire your brain to be less reactive and more strategic. Your brain has three major systems that interact to create what you experience as emotions. The first is the limbic system, which includes the amygdala and hippocampus. This is your emotional brain. It processes threats, rewards, and social information. It generates the feeling states you experience as fear, anger, joy, and sadness. This system is fast, automatic, and largely unconscious. The second system is your prefrontal cortex, particularly the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. This is your reasoning brain. It handles planning, decision-making, impulse control, and emotional regulation. It's what allows you to think about your thinking and choose your responses. This system is slower, deliberate, and conscious. The third system is your autonomic nervous system, which has two branches, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic system activates your stress response, increasing heart rate, blood pressure, and muscle tension. The parasympathetic system activates your relaxation response, calming your body and mind. These systems create the physical sensations you associate with different emotions. When you encounter a trigger, here's what happens in your brain. The sensory information reaches your thalamus, which acts as a relay station. From there, it takes two routes. The fast route goes directly to your amygdala, which can trigger an emotional response within milliseconds. The slow route goes to your prefrontal cortex, which takes a few hundred milliseconds to process the information and generate a reasoned response. This is why you often react before you think. Your amygdala fires first. It floods your system with stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. These hormones prepare your body for fight or flight by increasing heart rate, dilating pupils, and redirecting blood flow to your muscles. They also impair your prefrontal cortex function, making it harder to think clearly. By the time your prefrontal cortex receives the information and generates a reasoned response, your amygdala has already triggered a cascade of physiological changes. You're already feeling the emotion. Your body is already preparing for action. And if you don't intervene, you'll act on that emotional impulse before your reasoning brain can override it. This is the neurological basis of emotional reactivity, and it's why most people struggle with emotional control. They're trying to use their slow reasoning brain to compete with their fast emotional brain. It's like trying to outrun a car on foot. The system is rigged against you unless you know how to work with it. But here's the crucial insight. While you can't prevent your amygdala from firing, you can train your prefrontal cortex to intervene faster and more effectively. You can strengthen the neural pathways that connect your reasoning brain to your emotional brain. You can build what neuroscientists call top-down regulation, where your prefrontal cortex modulates the activity of your amygdala. This training happens through a process called neuroplasticity. Your brain is not fixed. It's constantly changing based on how you use it. Every time you successfully regulate an emotion, you're strengthening the neural connections that make emotional regulation easier in the future. Every time you react emotionally without thinking, you're strengthening the neural connections that make you more reactive in the future. Think of your brain as a forest with many possible paths. The paths you walk most frequently become wider and easier to travel. The paths you rarely use become overgrown and harder to find. If you habitually react emotionally to triggers, you're creating a wide, well-worn path from stimulus to automatic response. If you habitually pause and choose your response, you're creating a wide, well-worn path from stimulus to deliberate choice. The implications of this are profound. You are not stuck with the emotional patterns you have now. Your tendency toward anger, anxiety, or reactivity is not a fixed trait. It's a habit pattern encoded in neural pathways that can be changed through consistent practice. You can literally rewire your brain to be calmer, more thoughtful, and more emotionally intelligent. The process of rewiring your brain for better emotional control involves several key mechanisms. The first is attention training. Your attention is like a spotlight that determines which neural pathways get strengthened. Where you direct your attention determines what your brain becomes better at. If you constantly focus on perceived slights and injustices, your brain becomes better at detecting threats and generating defensive reactions. If you train your attention to focus on solutions and opportunities, your brain becomes better at generating productive responses. Mindfulness meditation is one of the most effective tools for attention training. When you practice mindfulness, you're literally strengthening your prefrontal cortex's ability to direct and sustain attention. Research using brain imaging technology shows that regular meditators have increased gray matter density in the prefrontal cortex and decreased activity in the amygdala. Their brains are structurally different in ways that support better emotional control. But you don't need to meditate for hours every day to benefit from these neuroplastic changes. Even brief daily practices can create measurable improvements in emotional regulation. Studies show that just 10 minutes of daily mindfulness practice for 8 weeks can create significant changes in brain structure and function. The key is consistency, not duration. The second mechanism is cognitive reframing. This is your ability to interpret situations in ways that don't trigger strong emotional reactions. When you encounter a potential trigger, your brain automatically generates an interpretation of what's happening. This interpretation determines your emotional response. If you interpret a colleague's critical comment as a personal attack, you'll feel angry and defensive. If you interpret the same comment as useful feedback from someone trying to improve the project, you'll feel curious and grateful. Most people don't realize that interpretation is a choice. They experience their initial interpretation as reality rather than as one possible way of understanding the situation. This is why cognitive reframing is so powerful. When you learn to generate alternative interpretations, you gain control over your emotional responses. The neural mechanism behind cognitive reframing involves strengthening connections between your prefrontal cortex and your limbic system. When you practice looking at situations from multiple perspectives, you're building neural highways that allow your reasoning brain to quickly provide alternative interpretations before your emotional brain locks into a reactive response. The third mechanism is exposure and habituation. Your amygdala is designed to generate strong reactions to novel or threatening stimuli. But with repeated exposure to a trigger without negative consequences, your amygdala learns that the trigger is not actually dangerous. This is called habituation, and it's a fundamental learning mechanism in your brain. If you avoid situations that trigger anxiety, you're preventing habituation from occurring. Your amygdala continues to flag those situations as dangerous because you never give your brain the opportunity to learn otherwise. But if you systematically expose yourself to anxiety-triggering situations while using emotional regulation techniques, Your amygdala gradually learns that these situations are not threats. The emotional intensity decreases over time. This is why avoidance is such a trap. It provides short-term relief from uncomfortable emotions, but it prevents long-term adaptation. Every time you avoid a difficult conversation, a challenging situation, or an anxiety-provoking opportunity, you're training your brain that these things are dangerous. You're strengthening the neural pathways that generate fear and avoidance. You're making yourself more emotionally fragile instead of more emotionally resilient. The fourth mechanism is stress inoculation. This is the process of deliberately exposing yourself to manageable levels of stress to build your stress tolerance. Just like how vaccines expose your immune system to weakened pathogens to build immunity, stress inoculation exposes your nervous system to controlled stressors to build resilience. When you successfully handle a stressful situation, your brain updates its assessment of your capabilities. Your prefrontal cortex becomes more confident in its ability to regulate your emotions under pressure. Your amygdala becomes less likely to trigger panic responses. Your autonomic nervous system becomes better at quickly returning to baseline after stress. This is why seeking challenges is so important for emotional development. You can't build emotional resilience by avoiding difficulty. You build it by repeatedly facing challenges that are just beyond your current comfort zone, succeeding or failing, extracting the lessons, and trying again. Each challenge successfully navigated is a data point that tells your brain, I can handle this. I'm more capable than I thought. The fifth mechanism involves the vagus nerve, the major nerve connecting your brain to your body's stress response system. The vagus nerve has two branches. The ventral vagal pathway activates your social engagement system, promoting calm and connection. The dorsal vagal pathway activates your freeze response when you're overwhelmed. Your sympathetic nervous system activates your fight or flight response. The key to emotional regulation is maintaining ventral vagal activation as much as possible. This keeps you in a state of calm alertness where your prefrontal cortex can function optimally. When you drop into sympathetic activation through fight or flight or dorsal vagal activation through freeze and shut down, your emotional control diminishes dramatically. You can directly influence vagal tone through specific practices. Slow, deep breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system and increases vagal tone. Cold exposure, like splashing cold water on your face, also stimulates the vagus nerve. Humming, singing, or chanting activates the vagus nerve through vocal cord vibration. These are not just relaxation techniques. They're neurological interventions that directly modulate your stress response. Understanding these mechanisms transforms how you approach emotional control. You're not trying to suppress emotions or fight against your nature. You're working with your brain's natural learning processes to reprogram your automatic responses. You're using neuroplasticity to create new patterns that serve you better than the old ones. Chapter 3. The 4 Pillars of Emotional Mastery. Emotional mastery is not a single skill. It's a comprehensive system built on 4 foundational pillars. Each pillar supports and reinforces the others. Weakness in any one pillar undermines your overall emotional stability. Strength in all 4 pillars creates an unshakable emotional foundation that allows you to maintain control even in the most challenging circumstances. The first pillar is self-awareness. This is your ability to accurately perceive and understand your own emotional states in real time. Most people have shockingly poor self-awareness. They're hijacked by emotions they don't recognize until those emotions have already controlled their behavior. They rationalize their emotional reactions as logical responses. They confuse feeling with truth. Developing self-awareness requires building the capacity to observe yourself while you're experiencing emotions. This is sometimes called the observer self or metacognitive awareness. It's the part of your consciousness that can watch your thoughts and feelings without being completely identified with them. This capacity doesn't come naturally. It must be developed through deliberate practice. The most effective practice for building self-awareness is body scanning. Throughout your day, pause regularly to check in with your physical sensations. What's the quality of your breathing? Where do you feel tension in your body? What's your heart rate? What's happening in your stomach? Your physical state is intimately connected to your emotional state. By learning to read your body's signals, you become aware of emotions before they escalate to the point where they control you. Another crucial practice is emotion labeling. When you feel a strong emotion arising, pause and name it precisely. Not just, I feel bad, but I feel anxious about this upcoming presentation, or I feel hurt by that dismissive comment, or I feel frustrated that this project is taking longer than expected. Research shows that the simple act of labeling an emotion reduces its intensity. The process of naming engages your prefrontal cortex, which helps regulate your limbic system. But accurate emotion labeling requires emotional vocabulary. Most people operate with a very limited emotional vocabulary. They know happy, sad, angry, and not much else. This is like trying to paint a masterpiece with only 3 colors. The more precisely you can identify your emotional states, the more control you have over them. Expand your emotional vocabulary deliberately. Learn the distinctions between frustration and resentment, between anxiety and fear, between disappointment and grief, between excitement and nervousness. Each of these emotional states has different causes and requires different responses. When you can identify your emotions precisely, you can respond appropriately. Self-awareness also requires understanding your emotional triggers. What situations, words, behaviors, or circumstances reliably trigger strong emotional reactions in you? For most people, their triggers are remarkably consistent. The same types of situations push the same buttons over and over, but they never stop to identify the pattern. They experience each triggered reaction as if it's a unique and justified response to the specific situation rather than recognizing it as a predictable pattern. Create a trigger inventory. Write down the situations that have triggered strong emotional reactions in you over the past month. Look for patterns. What do these situations have in common? What underlying needs, fears, or values are being activated? This analysis moves you from unconscious reactivity to conscious understanding. The second pillar of emotional mastery is response flexibility. This is your ability to generate multiple possible responses to any situation and choose the most effective one. Most people have very limited response repertoires. They react to triggers in the same ways over and over, even when those reactions consistently produce bad outcomes. This is not stupidity, it's neurology. Your brain is designed to automate repeated behaviors to conserve energy. When you respond to a type of situation the same way multiple times, your brain creates an automated response pattern. The next time you encounter that type of situation, your brain automatically activates that pattern without conscious thought. This is efficient when the pattern is effective. It's disastrous when the pattern is destructive. Breaking out of destructive response patterns requires consciously expanding your behavioral options. When you encounter a trigger, instead of automatically falling into your habitual response, pause and ask yourself, what are 5 different ways I could respond to this situation? Force yourself to generate options, even if some of them seem absurd or inappropriate. The goal is not to find the perfect response immediately. The goal is to break the automatic connection between trigger and habitual response. This practice creates neural flexibility. Each time you generate alternative responses, you're building neural pathways that make it easier to access different behavioral options in the future. Over time, what once required conscious effort becomes more automatic. You develop a rich repertoire of responses that you can draw from based on what the situation requires rather than being locked into a single reactive pattern. Response flexibility also requires understanding the concept of response effectiveness. Not all responses are equally effective. Some responses might feel satisfying in the moment, but create worse problems in the long run. Some responses might be uncomfortable in the moment, but lead to better long-term outcomes. Emotional mastery requires being able to evaluate responses based on their likely consequences rather than just how they feel. Create a simple framework for evaluating response effectiveness. For any potential response, ask 3 questions. First, will this response help me achieve my long-term goals in this situation? Second, will this response damage or strengthen important relationships? Third, will this response make me proud of myself when I look back on this moment later? These questions shift your evaluation from emotional satisfaction to strategic effectiveness. The third pillar of emotional mastery is distress tolerance. This is your ability to experience uncomfortable emotions without needing to immediately escape or suppress them. Most emotional reactivity is driven by distress avoidance. You lash out in anger because you can't tolerate feeling disrespected. You avoid difficult conversations because you can't tolerate anxiety. You numb yourself with distractions because you can't tolerate sadness or emptiness. The belief underlying poor distress tolerance is that uncomfortable emotions are dangerous or intolerable. This belief is almost never true. Emotions are information and energy. They're uncomfortable, but they're not dangerous. You will not die from feeling anxious. You will not be destroyed by feeling hurt. You will not cease to function because you feel sad. These emotions are unpleasant, but they're survivable. Building distress tolerance requires relearning this truth at a visceral level. You must prove to yourself through repeated experience that you can feel uncomfortable emotions without escaping or being destroyed. This is counterintuitive because your instinct is to avoid discomfort. But avoidance keeps you trapped in cycles of reactivity because you'll do anything to escape uncomfortable feelings, including behaviors that damage your life. The practice of building distress tolerance is simple, but not easy. When you feel an uncomfortable emotion arising, instead of immediately trying to change it, escape it, or distract yourself from it, sit with it. Feel it fully. Notice where it shows up in your body. Notice the thoughts that accompany it. Notice your urge to make it go away, and then do nothing. Just sit with the discomfort. This practice is profoundly uncomfortable at first. Your entire nervous system is screaming at you to do something to make the feeling stop. But if you can sit through this discomfort without reacting, something remarkable happens. The emotion peaks, plateaus, and then naturally decreases. You discover that emotions are temporary. They rise, they crest, and they fall. They don't last forever, even when it feels like they will. Each time you successfully sit with an uncomfortable emotion without reacting, you're building evidence that emotions are tolerable. You're training your brain that discomfort is not an emergency requiring immediate action. You're expanding your window of tolerance, the range of emotional intensity you can experience while maintaining your capacity for thoughtful response. Distress tolerance doesn't mean you enjoy uncomfortable emotions or seek them out. It means you can function effectively even when you're experiencing them. You can have a difficult conversation while feeling anxious. You can make an important decision while feeling uncertain. You can pursue your goals while feeling discouraged. Your effectiveness is not dependent on feeling comfortable. The fourth pillar of emotional mastery is values alignment. This is your ability to choose responses based on your deeply held values rather than your momentary emotional states. Values are the principles and priorities that define what kind of person you want to be and what kind of life you want to create. When your behavior is aligned with your values, you experience integrity and self-respect. When your behavior contradicts your values, you experience shame and self-doubt. Most people's behavior is driven primarily by emotion and circumstances rather than values. They know what they value in theory, but in practice, they abandon their values whenever those values conflict with avoiding discomfort. They value honesty until a lie is more convenient. They value courage until fear gets intense. They value patience until frustration takes over. This misalignment between values and behavior is corrosive. It creates a divided self where who you want to be is constantly at war with how you actually behave. This internal conflict drains energy and undermines confidence. You can't trust yourself because you know you'll abandon your principles when things get difficult. Building values alignment requires first getting clear about what you actually value, not what you think you should value or what other people value. This requires honest self-examination. What matters most to you? What kind of person do you want to be? What do you want your life to stand for? These questions don't have right or wrong answers. They have honest or dishonest answers. Write down your core values. Not a long list, but 3 to 5 values that are most important to you. These might include integrity, courage, growth, compassion, excellence, freedom, family, creativity, or contribution. Choose values that resonate deeply with who you are and who you want to become. These values will serve as your North Star when emotions try to pull you off course. Once your values are clear, the practice of values alignment is straightforward. When you're facing a difficult situation or experiencing strong emotions, pause and ask, what would the person I want to be do in this situation? Not what feels good, not what's easy, not what you feel like doing. What would be consistent with your values? This question shifts your decision-making framework from emotion-driven to values-driven. You're no longer at the mercy of whatever you happen to be feeling. You have a stable reference point that transcends your fluctuating emotional states. This creates remarkable freedom because you know how to act regardless of what you're feeling. Values-driven behavior requires sacrifice. It requires choosing discomfort in service of your principles. It requires doing hard things because they're right, not because they're easy. It requires disappointing others sometimes to stay true to yourself. This is why most people don't do it. They want the benefits of values alignment, the self-respect and integrity, without the costs. But you can't have one without the other. These 4 pillars, self-awareness, response flexibility, distress tolerance, and values alignment, form the foundation of emotional mastery. They're not separate skills. They're interconnected capacities that support and reinforce each other. Self-awareness without response flexibility leaves you stuck watching yourself react in the same destructive ways. Response flexibility without distress tolerance collapses when emotions get intense. Distress tolerance without values alignment might keep you calm, but it won't guide you toward meaningful action. Values alignment without self-awareness becomes rigid and disconnected from reality. Develop all 4 pillars simultaneously. Each practice session can work on multiple pillars at once. When you sit with uncomfortable emotions, you're building both self-awareness and distress tolerance. When you pause to generate alternative responses, you're building both response flexibility and values alignment. The pillars grow together through consistent practice that challenges you to expand your emotional capacity in all directions simultaneously. Chapter 4. Practical Techniques for Real-Time Emotional Regulation. Theory without practice is useless. You can understand the neuroscience of emotions perfectly and still be controlled by them if you don't have practical techniques you can deploy in real time when emotions threaten to hijack your behavior. This chapter gives you a toolkit of concrete practices that work in the moment when you need them most. The first and most fundamental technique is the tactical pause. This is a deliberate interruption of the automatic sequence from trigger to reaction. When you feel an emotion rising, you physically and mentally stop before acting on it. You create space between stimulus and response. This sounds simple, but it's revolutionary in practice. The tactical pause works because of timing. Your amygdala fires within milliseconds, but the emotional cascade it triggers takes several seconds to fully develop. If you can interrupt this cascade early, before it reaches its peak intensity, you can prevent the emotion from overwhelming your prefrontal cortex. But if you wait until the emotion is at full intensity, your window of control has closed. This means you must catch emotions early. You can't wait until you're in a full rage before trying to pause. You need to notice the first signs of emotional activation, the slight increase in heart rate, the subtle tension in your shoulders, the first whisper of reactive thoughts. These early warning signs are your opportunity to intervene before the emotion gains momentum. When you notice these early signs, immediately implement a physical pause. Stop talking if you're in the middle of speaking. Step back if you're leaning forward. Take a breath. The physical action of pausing sends a signal to your brain that interrupts the automatic reaction sequence. It's like pressing a circuit breaker that stops the current flow. During this pause, you have several options for what to do next. The most reliable is breath control. Your breathing is the only part of your autonomic nervous system that you can directly control. When you control your breathing, you indirectly control your stress response. This is not mystical. It's pure physiology. The specific breathing pattern that most effectively calms your nervous system is called box breathing or tactical breathing. You breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, breathe out for 4 counts, and hold for 4 counts. Then repeat. This pattern activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which counteracts your sympathetic stress response. Within 60 to 90 seconds of box breathing, you'll notice a measurable decrease in emotional intensity. But box breathing only works if you actually do it when emotions are rising. Most people learn the technique and then forget to use it in the moment when they need it. This is because emotional activation impairs your memory and decision-making. You can't rely on remembering to use your tools when you're triggered. You need to make the tools so automatic that they activate without conscious decision. Build breath control into your daily routine. Practice box breathing for 2 minutes every morning. Practice it before difficult conversations. Practice it during workouts. The more you practice in calm states, the more automatically it will activate in stressed states. You're building a conditioned response where emotional activation triggers breath control instead of behavioral reaction. The second real-time technique is cognitive labeling. This is the practice of naming your emotional experience as you're having it. When you feel anger rising, you silently say to yourself, "This is anger. I'm experiencing anger right now." This simple act of labeling has been SHOWN in neuroscience research to reduce emotional intensity. The mechanism is fascinating. When you label an emotion, you activate your prefrontal cortex's language centers. This activation dampens the activity in your amygdala. It's as if your brain has limited resources, and when you direct those resources to the conscious act of labeling, fewer resources are available for the unconscious process of emotional escalation. But labeling only works when you do it with the right mindset. You're not judging yourself for having the emotion. You're not trying to suppress it. You're simply observing and naming what's present. I'm feeling defensive. I'm experiencing anxiety. I'm noticing frustration arising. The tone is neutral and curious, like a scientist observing a phenomenon. Combine labeling with somatic awareness. Where do you feel the emotion in your body? I'm feeling tightness in my chest and tension in my jaw. This combination of emotional and physical labeling creates even stronger prefrontal activation and even more effective emotional regulation. The third technique is perspective shifting. When you're caught in an emotional reaction, your perspective narrows dramatically. You become locked into one way of seeing the situation, usually the interpretation that justifies your emotional response. Breaking out of this narrow perspective is essential for regaining control. The most effective perspective shift is temporal distancing. Ask yourself, how will I view this situation in 5 years? Will this matter? Will I be proud of how I responded? This question forces your brain to shift from the immediate emotional perspective to a longer-term view. Most situations that trigger strong emotions in the moment will be completely forgotten in 5 years. Reminding yourself of this reality deflates the emotional intensity. Another powerful perspective shift is reverse roles. Ask yourself, if I were the other person in this situation, how would I see it? What might they be experiencing or trying to accomplish? This doesn't mean you have to agree with their perspective or excuse bad behavior. It simply means expanding your view to include information your emotional reaction is ignoring. The fly-on-the-wall perspective is also useful. Imagine you're observing this situation from outside yourself. What would an impartial observer notice? How would they describe what's happening? This externalized perspective helps you see elements of the situation that your emotional involvement is hiding from you. The fourth technique is values anchoring. When emotions are pulling you toward reactive behavior, you need an anchor that keeps you connected to what matters most to you. This is where your values become operational rather than just theoretical. Before you respond to a triggering situation, ask yourself, what would the person I want to be do right now? What action would align with my core values? This question shifts your decision-making framework from emotion-driven to values-driven. You're no longer asking what feels good or what you feel like doing. You're asking what's consistent with your principles. For this technique to work in real time, you need to have done the preparatory work of clearly defining your values. If you're unclear about what you value, you can't use those values as an anchor in difficult moments. But if you've invested time in identifying and articulating your core values, they become a reliable compass. The fifth technique is energy redirection. Strong emotions come with intense physical energy. This energy needs somewhere to go. If you try to just sit still and suppress it, you're fighting against your physiology. Instead, redirect the energy into physical action that doesn't damage your goals or relationships. When you feel anger rising, you can channel that energy into a workout, a walk, or even just tensing and releasing your muscles deliberately. When you feel anxiety, you can channel that energy into productive action on whatever you're anxious about. The key is to match the energy level of the emotion with the intensity of the physical activity. This is not the same as catharsis theory, which suggested that venting anger by hitting pillows or yelling reduces anger. Research has thoroughly debunked catharsis theory. Expressing aggression makes you more aggressive, not less. What works is redirecting the physical energy into neutral or positive channels while you simultaneously process the emotion mentally. The sixth technique is the 5-second rule for speech. When you're emotionally activated and about to say something, count to 5 before speaking. This brief delay gives your prefrontal cortex time to catch up with your amygdala. In those 5 seconds, you can ask yourself, is what I'm about to say true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? Will I regret saying this? Most regrettable things are said in the first 5 seconds of an emotional reaction. The angry retort, the defensive justification, the cruel jab designed to hurt because you're hurting. If you can delay these impulse statements for just 5 seconds, you'll often choose not to say them at all. And the statements you do choose to make after the 5-second delay will be more thoughtful and less damaging. The seventh technique is environmental modification. Sometimes the most effective way to regulate your emotions is to change your physical environment. If a conversation is escalating toward conflict, you can suggest taking a break and resuming later. If a situation is overwhelming, you can excuse yourself briefly to regain composure. If certain environments reliably trigger negative emotions, you can modify or avoid those environments. This is not avoidance. Avoidance is refusing to face situations that need to be faced. Environmental modification is strategically managing your environment to support your emotional regulation goals. There's a crucial difference. You're not running away from difficulty. You're creating conditions that allow you to engage with difficulty more effectively. The 8th technique is physical grounding. When emotions are intense, you can lose connection with your body and become completely identified with your thoughts and feelings. Physical grounding brings you back into your body and the present moment. Simple grounding practices include pressing your feet firmly into the floor and noticing the sensation, holding a cold object and focusing on the temperature, tensing and releasing muscle groups systematically, or splashing cold water on your face. These physical sensations interrupt the emotional spiral by anchoring your attention in immediate physical reality. The 9th technique is the stop method. Stop, take a breath, observe, proceed. This is a comprehensive framework that combines several of the techniques already discussed. When you notice emotional activation, you stop whatever you're doing. You take a deliberate breath using box breathing or similar technique. You observe what you're feeling, thinking, and experiencing in your body. Then you proceed with a conscious choice about how to respond. STOP is particularly useful because it gives you a simple, memorable acronym you can recall even when your thinking is impaired by emotional activation. You don't have to remember complex instructions. You just remember STOP, and the acronym reminds you of the sequence. The 10th technique is pre-commitment. This involves making decisions about how you'll respond to predictable triggers before you encounter them. When you're calm and thinking clearly, you can plan your response strategy for situations you know will be challenging. Then when you encounter those situations, you're executing a pre-made plan rather than making decisions while emotionally compromised. For example, if you know that certain topics reliably escalate into arguments with your partner, you can pre-commit to a specific response strategy. When we start talking about finances and I feel myself getting defensive, I will take 3 deep breaths, acknowledge their concern, and suggest we revisit this conversation after we've both had time to think. Having this pre-commitment in place makes it much more likely you'll follow through. These 10 techniques are not meant to be used one at a time. They're a toolkit. In any given situation, you might use 2 or 3 or 5 of them simultaneously. You might start with a tactical pause, move into box breathing, add cognitive labeling, and finish with values anchoring. The techniques work synergistically. Each one you add increases the effectiveness of the others. The key to making these techniques work is practice. You cannot learn to regulate your emotions just by reading about these techniques. You must practice them repeatedly until they become automatic. Start with the situations that are least emotionally intense. Practice the techniques when you're only mildly triggered. Build your skills gradually. As your capacity increases, you'll be able to use these techniques effectively in increasingly challenging situations. Chapter 5. Mastering Difficult Conversations. Nowhere is emotional control more critical than in difficult conversations. These are the conversations where emotions run high, stakes matter, and relationships hang in the balance. The difference between those who handle these conversations well and those who don't comes down to one factor: emotional regulation. Most people approach difficult conversations with the wrong goal. They think the goal is to win the argument, prove they're right, or get the other person to agree with them. These goals guarantee emotional escalation and poor outcomes. The real goal of difficult conversations is to exchange information, understand different perspectives, and move toward solutions while maintaining or improving the relationship. This goal requires keeping both people in a state where their prefrontal cortexes are functioning. The moment either person becomes emotionally flooded, rational dialogue becomes impossible. They're no longer processing information or considering perspectives. They're in defensive mode, focused on protecting themselves or attacking the other person. The conversation has failed regardless of who wins the argument. Your first responsibility in difficult conversations is managing your own emotional state. You cannot control the other person's emotions, but you can control yours. And your emotional state has a powerful influence on theirs through emotional contagion. When you stay calm, it makes it easier for them to stay calm. When you escalate, they're likely to match your escalation. Before entering a difficult conversation, prepare yourself mentally and physically. Clarify your intention. What do you actually want to accomplish? What would a good outcome look like? What are your non-negotiables versus your preferences? This clarity helps you stay focused when emotions arise. Also, identify your likely emotional triggers in this conversation. Based on your history with this person and this topic, what might they say or do that would trigger a strong reaction in you? Having this self-awareness allows you to prepare your response strategy in advance. Use physical preparation to set your nervous system up for success. Do box breathing for 2 minutes before the conversation. Do progressive muscle relaxation to release tension. These practices activate your parasympathetic nervous system and create a buffer against emotional reactivity. When the conversation begins, pay attention to your physical state. This is your early warning system for emotional activation. The moment you notice your heart rate increasing, your breath becoming shallow, or tension building in your body, those are signals that your emotional regulation strategies need to activate. Implement the tactical pause frequently throughout difficult conversations. You don't need to wait until you're highly activated. Pause regularly to check in with yourself. Are you still clear about your goal? Are you listening to understand or just waiting to respond? Are you staying connected to your values or getting pulled into reactive patterns? One of the most powerful tools for difficult conversations is reflective listening. This is not just repeating back what the other person said. It's demonstrating that you understand their perspective, including the emotions and needs underlying their words. It sounds like you're frustrated because you feel like your contributions haven't been recognized. This kind of reflection does several things simultaneously. First, it forces you to actually listen instead of just formulating your defense. You can't reflect someone's perspective accurately if you're not paying attention to it. Second, it slows down the conversation and creates space for thoughtful exchange rather than reactive volleys. Third, it helps the other person feel heard, which is often half of what they need from the conversation. Most conflicts persist not because people fundamentally disagree, but because each person doesn't feel heard by the other. When people feel unheard, they escalate. They get louder, more insistent, more emotional. They're not trying to be difficult. They're trying to be understood. Reflective listening short-circuits this escalation by demonstrating understanding. But reflective listening only works if it's genuine. If you're doing it manipulatively, as a technique to get the other person to calm down so you can make your point, they'll sense the inauthenticity and it will backfire. You have to actually care about understanding their perspective, even if you disagree with it. The second major tool for difficult conversations is speaking from your own experience rather than making judgments about the other person. Compare these two statements. You're being disrespectful versus I feel disrespected when you interrupt me. The first is a judgment that will trigger defensiveness. The second is a statement about your experience that's much harder to argue with. This doesn't mean you can never give feedback or point out problematic behavior. It means you do it in a way that's more likely to be received. When you arrived 30 minutes late without calling, I felt frustrated because I had arranged my schedule around our meeting. Is more effective than you're inconsiderate and don't respect other people's time. The structure for this kind of communication is when you specific behavior I felt emotion because impact or need. This structure focuses on observable behavior rather than character judgments, owns your emotional reaction, and explains the why behind your response. This makes it much easier for the other person to hear the feedback without becoming defensive. The third tool is explicit emotional acknowledgement. When emotions are present in a conversation, ignoring them doesn't make them go away. It makes them more powerful because they're operating underground. Acknowledging emotions explicitly brings them into the light where they can be addressed. This might sound like, I notice I'm feeling defensive right now, and I want to stay open to what you're saying. Or, it seems like this topic is bringing up some strong feelings for both of us. Should we take a moment before continuing? This kind of acknowledgement does something remarkable. It separates you from your emotions. You're not the emotion. You're the person experiencing and observing the emotion. This distinction gives you power over the emotion. When the other person is emotionally activated, acknowledging their emotion can be incredibly disarming. I can see that you're really angry about this. That simple acknowledgement often reduces the intensity of the emotion because the person feels seen. But this only works if your tone is genuine and non-judgmental. If there's any hint of condescension or dismissiveness, it will inflame rather than calm. The fourth tool is strategic breaks. When a conversation is escalating toward conflict, sometimes the best move is to pause it. I want to have this conversation with you, and I want to do it well. I'm noticing we're both getting heated. Can we take a 20-minute break and come back to this? This is not avoidance. It's strategic de-escalation. During the break, use your emotional regulation techniques. Don't spend the break rehearsing your arguments or building your case. That will make you more activated, not less. Use the break to calm your nervous system, gain perspective, and reconnect with your values and goals for the conversation. When you resume the conversation, explicitly acknowledge the break and reaffirm your intention. Thank you for agreeing to take that break. I want to understand your perspective and find a solution that works for both of us. This reorientation helps both people reset emotionally and refocus on productive dialogue. The fifth tool is boundary setting. Some conversations require you to establish limits on what's acceptable. This is particularly important when the other person's behavior crosses into verbal abuse, manipulation, or other patterns that make constructive dialogue impossible. Effective boundaries are clear, specific, and enforced. I want to hear your concerns, but I'm not willing to continue this conversation if you're yelling at me. If you can speak calmly, I'll stay, and we can work through this. If not, I'm going to leave, and we can try again later when we're both calmer. Setting boundaries is not an ultimatum or a power play. It's protecting the conditions necessary for a productive conversation. Some people will respect boundaries once they're clearly stated. Others will test them to see if you're serious. This is why enforcement is crucial. If you state a boundary and then don't enforce it when it's crossed, you've taught the other person that your boundaries are meaningless. The sixth tool is solution focus. Many difficult conversations get stuck in problem focus. Both people spend all their energy talking about what's wrong, who's at fault, and why the situation is unacceptable. This keeps everyone mired in negativity and resentment. At some point, you need to pivot to solution focus. We've identified the problem. Now, what are some possible solutions? This doesn't mean dismissing the problem or the emotions around it. It means shifting from pure analysis and complaint toward action and resolution. Solution focus works best when you generate multiple options before evaluating any of them. Brainstorm possibilities without judging them. The goal in this phase is quantity and creativity, not quality. Once you have several options on the table, then you can evaluate their feasibility and likely outcomes. This approach reduces defensiveness because you're working together toward solutions rather than fighting over who's right. It creates forward momentum instead of keeping you stuck in past grievances. And it channels the energy of the conversation toward construction rather than destruction. The seventh tool is meta-communication. This is communication about the communication itself. I notice we keep talking past each other. Can we pause and make sure we're actually addressing the same issue? Or we seem to be stuck. What do you think is preventing us from making progress here? Meta-communication lifts the conversation to a higher level where you can observe patterns and adjust strategy. It's like zooming out to see the forest instead of staying stuck in the trees. This perspective often reveals dynamics that weren't visible when you were caught in the content of the argument. These tools for difficult conversations are most effective when used together as part of a comprehensive approach. You don't just use one tool and hope it works. You use multiple tools, adjust based on how the conversation is flowing, and remain flexible in your approach while staying anchored to your core goals and values. The mark of mastery in difficult conversations is not that they're always easy or comfortable. It's that you can stay connected to your purpose and your values even when emotions are intense. You can listen when you want to defend. You can be curious when you want to be right. You can stay calm when you want to escalate. This is power. This is emotional mastery in action. Chapter 6. Building Unshakable Confidence Through Emotional Mastery. Confidence is not something you're born with. It's not a personality trait. It's not luck. Confidence is the direct result of knowing you can handle whatever life throws at you. And that knowledge comes from one source, repeatedly proving to yourself that you can manage your emotions and respond effectively regardless of circumstances. Most people think confidence means feeling certain and unafraid. This is completely backwards. Real confidence is knowing you can function effectively even when you're uncertain and afraid. It's not the absence of self-doubt. It's the ability to act despite self-doubt. It's not fearlessness. It's courage, which is feeling fear and moving forward anyway. The foundation of this kind of confidence is emotional self-reliance. This is the deep knowing that your emotional state is within your control, that you're not at the mercy of circumstances, other people's behavior, or random events, that you can generate the emotional states you need through your own thoughts, actions, and practices. Most people's emotional states are completely dependent on external factors. They feel good when things go well. They feel bad when things go poorly. They feel confident when people approve of them. They feel insecure when people criticize them. This is emotional dependence, and it guarantees that your confidence will be fragile and unstable. Emotional self-reliance means you can stabilize your own emotional state, regardless of what's happening around you. You're having a terrible day at work, but you can still show up fully present for your partner that evening. You received harsh criticism, but you can still maintain your self-worth and extract useful feedback. You're facing a major challenge, but you can still access the calm focus needed to respond effectively. This doesn't develop overnight. It develops through accumulated evidence. Every time you successfully regulate your emotions during a difficult situation, you add data to your internal database. Your brain updates its assessment of your capabilities. I thought I couldn't handle that level of stress, but I did. I'm more capable than I believed. This is why seeking challenges is essential for building confidence. You cannot build confidence by avoiding difficulty. You can only build it by facing challenges that test your limits and proving to yourself that you can handle them. Each challenge successfully navigated becomes evidence. Each time you maintain emotional control under pressure becomes proof. The process looks like this. You face a situation that triggers strong emotions. Instead of reacting automatically, you use your emotional regulation techniques. You pause, breathe, label your emotions, connect to your values, and choose your response deliberately. You handle the situation better than you would have if you'd reacted emotionally. Afterwards, you reflect on what happened and extract the lessons. This reflection is crucial. Your brain needs to consciously process the experience and update its models of what you're capable of. If you just move on to the next thing without reflection, you miss the opportunity to consolidate the learning. Take 5 minutes after any challenging situation to ask yourself, what did I do well? What could I improve? What did I learn about myself? What will I do differently next time? Over time, this process creates a deep reservoir of evidence that you can trust yourself to handle difficult situations. This is what unshakable confidence feels like. Not certainty that everything will go perfectly. Certainty that you can handle whatever happens. Not belief that you'll never fail. Belief that failure won't break you. The second pillar of confidence through emotional mastery is competence building. Confidence without competence is delusion. You need actual skills, actual knowledge, actual abilities. But here's what most people miss. The most important competence you can develop is emotional competence. Because emotional competence enables every other kind of competence. Think about it. What stops most people from developing new skills? Fear of failure, discomfort with being a beginner, frustration when progress is slow. These are all emotional barriers, not capability barriers. When you have strong emotional regulation skills, these barriers lose their power. You can be uncomfortable and still practice. You can fail and still persist. You can be frustrated and still continue. This is why emotionally masterful people often seem to have such diverse capabilities. They're not necessarily more talented. They're more willing to persist through the emotional discomfort of the learning process. They don't quit when things get hard because hard feelings don't control their behavior. Develop meta skills alongside specific skills. Meta skills are skills that enable other skills. Problem solving is a meta skill. When you're skilled at breaking down complex problems into manageable pieces, you can learn almost anything. Learning agility is a meta skill. When you're skilled at quickly acquiring new knowledge, you're never limited by what you currently know. Communication is perhaps the most valuable meta skill. When you can express ideas clearly, listen deeply, navigate conflict constructively, and build rapport with diverse people, countless doors open. Most opportunities in life require working with and through other people. Communication skill makes this possible. But all of these meta skills require emotional regulation. You can't problem solve effectively when you're emotionally flooded. You can't learn quickly when you're anxious and defensive. You can't communicate skillfully when you're reactive and self-protective. Emotional mastery is the foundation that makes all other competencies accessible. The third pillar is integrity alignment. This is the consistency between your values, your words, and your actions. When these three elements align, you develop an inner strength that makes you nearly unshakable. When they're misaligned, you feel weak and uncertain because you don't trust yourself. Most people compromise their integrity gradually through small decisions. They tell white lies to avoid discomfort. They make promises they don't keep. They act in ways that contradict their stated values. Each compromise seems minor, but they accumulate. Over time, you develop a reputation with yourself as someone who can't be trusted. Your confidence erodes because you know you'll abandon your principles when things get difficult. Building integrity requires radical honesty with yourself about what you actually value versus what you think you should value. Many people carry values that were handed to them by parents, culture, or society. These borrowed values don't create genuine integrity because they're not really yours. Do the hard work of identifying your authentic values. What actually matters to you, not what should matter, not what others think should matter. What genuinely resonates with who you are and who you want to become. This might include values your culture celebrates. It might include values your culture criticizes. What matters is that they're truly yours. Once your values are clear, integrity alignment becomes a practice. Before making any significant decision, ask, is this consistent with my values? When you're tempted to take the easy path that violates your principles, pause and reconnect with what matters most to you. When you make a commitment, treat it as sacred because your self-trust depends on following through. This doesn't mean rigid perfectionism. You'll make mistakes. You'll fall short sometimes. Integrity alignment includes acknowledging when you've acted inconsistently with your values, making it right when possible, and recommitting to your principles. The goal is not flawless consistency. The goal is genuine alignment between who you want to be and how you actually behave. The fourth pillar is resilience building. This is your track record of recovering from setbacks, learning from failures, and coming back stronger from adversity. Every time you face a challenge and emerge better rather than broken, you build evidence that difficulties don't destroy you. They develop you. Most people try to avoid adversity, but this weakens them. When you avoid challenges, you never prove to yourself that you can handle them. You remain fragile and fearful. Your confidence is untested and therefore uncertain. You don't really know what you're capable of because you've never pushed your limits. Building resilience requires deliberately seeking challenges that force you to grow, not recklessly, not masochistically, but intentionally choosing growth over comfort, taking on projects that scare you, having conversations you've been avoiding, pursuing goals that require you to become more than you currently are. The key is approaching these challenges with the right mindset. You're not seeking adversity for its own sake. You're seeking it as training, as opportunities to strengthen your emotional regulation skills, as chances to prove to yourself that you're more capable than you believed. When you face setbacks, and you will, your response determines whether the experience builds or erodes your confidence. The resilient response is, "This didn't work. What can I learn? What will I do differently next time? How can I use this experience to become stronger?" The defeated response is, "This proves I'm not capable. I should give up. This always happens to me." Your brain believes whatever story you consistently tell it. Tell yourself stories of resilience, and you'll develop resilience. Tell yourself stories of defeat, and you'll develop learned helplessness. This is not positive thinking platitudes. This is how your brain's learning systems work. Your interpretations shape your neural pathways. Create a resilience portfolio. Keep a record of challenges you've faced and overcome. When you're facing a new challenge and starting to doubt yourself, review your portfolio. Remind yourself of previous situations where you weren't sure you could handle it, but did. This evidence counteracts self-doubt and reconnects you with your capability. These four pillars work together synergistically. Emotional self-reliance enables you to pursue competence development without being stopped by uncomfortable feelings. Competence building gives you real capabilities that make integrity alignment possible. Integrity alignment creates the inner strength that makes resilience possible. Resilience proves your capability, which reinforces your emotional self-reliance. It's a virtuous cycle. The confidence that emerges from this foundation is qualitatively different from superficial confidence based on arrogance or external validation. It's quiet, it's calm, it doesn't need to prove itself. It simply knows. This is the confidence that allows you to take extraordinary risks, because you know that even if you fail, you'll be okay. This is the confidence that makes you dangerous because you can't be controlled through fear or intimidation. Chapter 7. The Neuroscience of Emotional Transformation. Understanding how your brain changes through emotional mastery practice is not just intellectually interesting, it's motivationally crucial. When you understand that you're literally rewiring your neural architecture, You can persist through difficult periods where progress feels invisible. You know that changes are happening at the cellular level, even when you can't perceive them yet. Your brain is plastic. This is not a metaphor, it's biological fact. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. Every experience you have, every thought you think, every behavior you perform is strengthening some neural pathways and weakening others. Your brain is constantly being sculpted by how you use it. This means you are not stuck with the emotional patterns you developed in childhood or the reactive tendencies that have characterized your adult life. Those patterns exist as neural pathways that fire automatically because they've been strengthened through repeated use. But new pathways can be built. Old pathways can be weakened. Your brain can literally be rewired for greater emotional control. The primary mechanism of neuroplastic change is repeated activation. Neurons that fire together wire together. This is Hebb's law, one of the fundamental principles of neuroscience. When you repeatedly activate a particular neural pathway, the connections between those neurons become stronger. The pathway becomes more efficient. Eventually, the behavior or response encoded in that pathway becomes automatic. This is how habits form. It's also how emotional patterns become ingrained. If you repeatedly react to criticism with defensiveness, you're strengthening the neural pathway from perceived criticism to defensive reaction. Each time you follow that pathway, it becomes a little bit wider, a little bit faster, a little bit more automatic. This is why reactive patterns feel so compelling. Your brain has literally built a superhighway for that response. But the same mechanism can be used to build new, more adaptive patterns. When you repeatedly practice pausing instead of reacting, you're building a neural pathway from trigger to pause. When you repeatedly practice reframing negative interpretations, you're building neural pathways for optimistic, solution-focused thinking. When you repeatedly practice staying calm under pressure, you're building neural pathways that support composure. The process requires consistency and time. Research suggests that it takes approximately 8 to 12 weeks of regular practice to create measurable structural changes in the brain. Some changes happen faster. The amygdala can show decreased reactivity within 2 to 4 weeks of daily mindfulness practice. But complete transformation of deeply ingrained patterns typically requires 6 months to 2 years of consistent effort. This timeline is both encouraging and sobering. Encouraging because it proves that lasting change is absolutely possible and backed by hard science. Sobering because it means there are no shortcuts. You cannot hack your way to emotional mastery. You cannot supplement your way there. You cannot affirm your way there. You have to put in the practice time. But here's what makes it worthwhile. Once these neural changes become established, they tend to be permanent. Unlike temporary behavior modifications that require constant effort to maintain, neuroplastic changes create new baseline patterns that become your brain's default mode. The person who struggles to control their anger becomes the person who naturally responds with calm assertiveness. The anxious person becomes the person who faces challenges with grounded confidence. The specific brain structures involved in emotional regulation are fascinating. Your prefrontal cortex, particularly the dorsolateral and ventromedial regions, is responsible for top-down emotional regulation. This is conscious, deliberate control of emotional responses. When you use the techniques in this book, you're activating and strengthening your prefrontal cortex. Research using brain imaging technology shows that people with strong emotional control have larger, more active prefrontal cortexes. But this is not just genetic luck. It's the result of practice. Every time you successfully regulate an emotion, you're stimulating growth in your prefrontal cortex. You're literally making your emotional control center bigger and stronger. Your amygdala is your brain's threat detection and emotional activation center. People who are emotionally reactive tend to have hyperactive amygdalas that fire easily and intensely in response to triggers. But the amygdala's reactivity can be modulated. Studies show that meditation practice decreases amygdala activity and even reduces its size over time. Your threat detection system becomes less hair-trigger, less likely to perceive danger where none exists. The connection between your prefrontal cortex and your amygdala is particularly important. In people with poor emotional control, this connection is weak. The prefrontal cortex has difficulty inhibiting the amygdala's emotional reactions. In people with strong emotional control, this connection is robust. The prefrontal cortex can quickly dampen amygdala activation, preventing emotions from spiraling out of control. Strengthening this connection is a primary goal of emotional regulation practice. Every time you use a cognitive technique to regulate an emotion, you're activating the pathway from your prefrontal cortex to your amygdala. Over time, this pathway becomes stronger and faster. Your reasoning brain develops better control over your emotional brain. The hippocampus, your memory formation center, also plays a crucial role. It provides context for emotional experiences. When your amygdala fires in response to a trigger, your hippocampus helps determine whether this trigger is actually dangerous based on past experiences. A well-functioning hippocampus helps you distinguish between real threats and false alarms. Chronic stress and emotional reactivity actually damage the hippocampus, shrinking its size and impairing its function. This creates a vicious cycle where stress impairs your ability to contextualize threats, leading to more stress reactivity, leading to more hippocampal damage. But positive practices like meditation, exercise, and stress management reverse this damage. The hippocampus can regrow and regain function when you create the right conditions. Your autonomic nervous system, controlled by your brainstem, creates the physical sensations you associate with emotions. The sympathetic branch activates your fight or flight response, increased heart rate, rapid breathing, muscle tension. The parasympathetic branch activates your rest and digest response, decreased heart rate, deep breathing, muscle relaxation. These systems create the physical sensations you associate with different emotions. The vagus nerve is the main highway of your parasympathetic system. High vagal tone, meaning strong vagus nerve activity, is associated with better emotional regulation, stress resilience, and mental health. Low vagal tone is associated with emotional reactivity, anxiety, and depression. The good news: vagal tone can be strengthened through specific practices. Slow breathing exercises, particularly those that emphasize long exhalations, directly stimulate the vagus nerve. Cold exposure, such as cold showers or ice water face immersion, also activates the vagus nerve. Humming, singing, or chanting creates vibrations that stimulate the vagus nerve. These are not just relaxation techniques. They're neurological interventions that reshape your stress response system. The insular cortex, buried deep in your brain, processes internal body sensations. This is your interception system, your ability to sense what's happening inside your body. Strong interoception is associated with better emotional awareness and regulation. You notice emotions arising early when they're easier to manage, rather than only becoming aware of them after they've overwhelmed you. Body scan meditation strengthens your insular cortex. Any practice that involves paying attention to physical sensations enhances interoceptive awareness. This is why somatic practices are so valuable for emotional regulation. They're not just about relaxation. They're about developing the neural capacity to sense and influence your internal state. Mirror neurons add another dimension to emotional neuroscience. These neurons fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing it. This means your brain simulates others' experiences and emotional states. This is the neural basis of empathy, but also of emotional contagion. When you're around emotionally reactive people, your mirror neurons are literally training your brain to be more reactive. When you're around emotionally regulated people, your mirror neurons are training your brain to be more regulated. This is why your social environment matters so profoundly. You're not just influenced by others' behavior. Your brain is actively mimicking their neural patterns. Choose your social environment deliberately. Surround yourself with people who model the emotional patterns you want to develop. Limit exposure to people whose emotional reactivity triggers yours. This is not about avoiding all difficult people. It's about being strategic about where you invest your time and attention, knowing that your brain is being shaped by these relationships. The timeline for neuroplastic change varies by individual and by the specific pattern being addressed. Some people notice improvements in emotional reactivity within 2 to 3 weeks of consistent practice. Others take longer, particularly if they're working to reverse decades of ingrained patterns. But virtually everyone who practices consistently experiences measurable improvement within 8 to 12 weeks. Significant structural changes in brain gray matter typically occur within 8 to 12 weeks of daily practice. Complete transformation of deep emotional patterns usually requires 6 months to 2 years. This might seem like a long time, but consider the alternative. You can spend the next 2 years developing emotional mastery that will serve you for the rest of your life. Or you can spend the next 2 years continuing to be controlled by reactive patterns. Either way, 2 years will pass. The only question is who you'll be at the end of it. The research is clear. Your brain will change based on how you use it. You can allow it to change randomly, shaped by whatever circumstances and influences happen to come your way. Or you can direct its change deliberately, sculpting it through intentional practice into a brain that serves your highest goals and values. This is not mysticism. This is neuroscience, and it puts extraordinary power in your hands. Chapter 8. Emotional Mastery in High-Stakes Situations. Everything you've learned gets tested when the pressure is intense and the stakes are high. It's one thing to practice emotional regulation during your morning meditation or in minor disagreements. It's entirely different when you're facing a crisis that could destroy your career, end your relationship, or threaten everything you've built. High-stakes situations create unique challenges for emotional regulation. The intensity of emotions is greater. The consequences of poor emotional control are more severe. The time pressure is often extreme. You don't have the luxury of taking a week to process your feelings. You need to respond effectively right now while you're emotionally activated, with limited information and no guarantee of success. This is where preparation becomes crucial. You cannot wait until you're in a crisis to develop emotional regulation skills. By then, it's too late. You need to have built the neural pathways, established the habits, and accumulated the evidence of your capability before the high-stakes situation arrives. Crisis is not the time for learning. It's the time for execution. Think of it like emergency medical training. Paramedics don't figure out how to perform CPR while someone is having a heart attack. They train extensively in low-pressure situations so that the skills are automatic when stakes are high. Your emotional regulation training works the same way. You practice in relatively calm situations so the skills are available in chaotic situations. The first principle of emotional mastery under pressure is pre-commitment. Before you enter a high-stakes situation, decide how you're going to respond to predictable challenges. What will you do if you're blindsided by unexpected information? What will you do if someone attacks your character? What will you do if you feel overwhelmed? Having predetermined response strategies prevents you from making reactive decisions while emotionally compromised. Write out your pre-commitments explicitly. If I start feeling defensive during this performance review, I will take 3 deep breaths. Remind myself that feedback is information, not attack, and ask clarifying questions instead of justifying. The act of writing activates different neural pathways than just thinking, making the commitment more likely to stick. The second principle is strategic preparation. Before high-stakes situations, prepare yourself mentally, emotionally, and physically. Visualize the situation going well, but also visualize potential challenges and see yourself handling them with composure. This mental rehearsal primes your brain to execute these responses when needed. Physically prepare by activating your parasympathetic nervous system. Do 10 minutes of box breathing before the situation. Do progressive muscle relaxation. Take a cold shower if that helps you feel alert and calm. You're not trying to eliminate all nervousness. Some activation is useful for performance. You're trying to prevent activation from crossing into reactivity. The third principle is focus narrowing. In high-pressure situations, your attention needs to be laser-focused on what matters most. Your amygdala will try to pull your attention to threats, worst-case scenarios, and everything that could go wrong. You need to deliberately direct your attention to your goals, your values, and your next action. Use a focusing question to anchor your attention. Before and during the high-stakes situation, repeatedly ask yourself, what's most important right now? This question cuts through the noise of anxious thoughts and emotional reactions. It brings you back to what actually matters. Your answer to this question determines where you invest your finite attentional resources. The fourth principle is emotional labeling under pressure. Even in high-stakes situations, especially in high-stakes situations, pause to name what you're feeling. I'm noticing anxiety. I'm feeling anger rising. This simple act of labeling maintains your prefrontal cortex activity and prevents your emotions from completely hijacking your behavior. The labeling needs to be brief and accurate. You don't have time for lengthy emotional analysis. You just need to acknowledge what's present so you're working with it consciously rather than being controlled by it unconsciously. 2 seconds of labeling can prevent 2 hours of regret. The 5th principle is values anchoring under duress. When emotions are intense and circumstances are chaotic, your values are your only reliable compass. Everything else, your feelings, your thoughts, even your perceptions, may be distorted by stress. But your core values remain stable if you've done the work to identify them authentically. In high-pressure moments, explicitly reconnect with your values. What would integrity require of me right now? What would courage look like in this situation? What response would I be proud of later? These questions activate your prefrontal cortex and connect your behavior to your deepest principles rather than your immediate emotions. The 6th principle is strategic vulnerability. In many high-stakes situations, particularly interpersonal ones, acknowledging your emotional state can be strategically valuable. I'm feeling nervous about this conversation, or I'm finding this situation overwhelming, creates human connection and often reduces the pressure. This is not weakness. It's emotional intelligence in action. You're demonstrating that you're self-aware and honest. You're inviting the other person to be human with you rather than playing roles. Often, when you acknowledge vulnerability, others relax and become more genuine as well. The entire interaction shifts from performance to authentic exchange. But strategic vulnerability only works when it's genuine and appropriate. If you're just using it as a manipulation tactic, people will sense the inauthenticity. And in some situations, particularly competitive or adversarial ones, vulnerability might be exploited rather than met with reciprocal authenticity. Use discernment. The 7th principle is damage control protocols. Sometimes, despite your best efforts, you'll lose emotional control in a high-stakes situation. You'll say something you regret. You'll react in a way that's inconsistent with your values. This happens. The question is, what do you do next? Have a predetermined damage control protocol. As soon as you recognize you've lost control, implement it immediately. This might include pause the conversation, take accountability for your reaction, request time to collect yourself, and commit to returning to the conversation with better composure. The faster you implement damage control, the less damage occurs. Most people make reactive mistakes worse by trying to justify them, minimize them, or blame others for triggering them. This compounds the damage. The emotionally masterful response is rapid acknowledgement, genuine apology if appropriate, and course correction. This actually builds respect and trust because people see that you have the strength to admit mistakes and the wisdom to correct them. The 8th principle is energy management. High-stakes situations are energetically expensive. They drain your cognitive and emotional resources rapidly. If you don't manage your energy strategically, you'll hit decision fatigue right when you need your sharpest thinking. Before high-stakes situations, ensure you're well-rested, well-fed, and hydrated. These basic physical factors dramatically impact your emotional regulation capacity. During extended high-stakes situations, take strategic breaks to replenish your resources. Even 5 minutes of breathing exercises and physical movement can significantly restore your regulatory capacity. The 9th principle is perspective maintenance. Under pressure, your perception narrows. You lose sight of the bigger picture. Everything feels urgent and critical. You need techniques to periodically zoom out and regain broader perspective. Use temporal distancing. Ask yourself, in 5 years, how will I view this situation? Will it matter? Most high-stakes situations feel more critical in the moment than they actually are. This question doesn't minimize genuinely important situations. It calibrates your emotional response to actual long-term significance. Use comparative perspective. Compared to truly catastrophic situations like terminal illness or loss of loved ones, how severe is this really? Again, this isn't about dismissing legitimate challenges. It's about maintaining proportionate emotional responses instead of treating every difficulty like life or death crisis. The 10th principle is recovery protocols. After high-stakes situations, you need to actively process and recover. Your nervous system has been highly activated. Your resources have been depleted. Without deliberate recovery, you carry that stress into your next interactions and decisions, progressively degrading your emotional regulation capacity. Have a standard post-crisis recovery routine. This might include physical movement to discharge stress energy, journaling to process the experience and extract lessons, conversation with a trusted person to gain perspective, and practices that activate your parasympathetic nervous system to return to baseline. Also do a formal review of your emotional regulation during the high-stakes situation. What worked? What didn't? When did you maintain control? When did you lose it? What triggered your most intense reactions? What will you do differently next time? This review converts experience into wisdom and ensures you're progressively improving rather than just surviving. High-stakes situations reveal your true level of emotional mastery. You can convince yourself you've developed strong emotional control when you're only practicing in comfortable conditions. But pressure exposes gaps in your skills. This is valuable feedback. Use it to identify where you need more practice rather than beating yourself up for imperfection. The goal is not to be emotionally perfect under pressure. The goal is to be progressively better. Each high-stakes situation you navigate with emotional control, even in perfect control, builds your capacity for the next one. Over time, situations that once overwhelmed you become manageable. Challenges that once seemed impossible become difficult but doable. This is growth. This is mastery. Chapter 9. Living as an emotionally masterful person. Emotional mastery is not a destination you reach and then stop. It's a way of living. It's a continuous practice that deepens and evolves throughout your life. This final chapter is about integrating everything you've learned into a sustainable lifestyle that supports ongoing growth and prevents regression. The emotionally masterful life is built on daily practices that maintain and strengthen your regulatory capacity. These are not intensive practices that require hours. They're brief, consistent practices that keep your skills sharp and your nervous system regulated. 10 to 15 minutes of daily practice is sufficient if you're consistent. Your morning routine should include at least one practice that activates your prefrontal cortex and calms your nervous system. This might be meditation, breathing exercises, journaling, or mindful movement. The specific practice matters less than the consistency. You're establishing a baseline of calm, focused awareness that serves you throughout the day. Your evening routine should include reflection and recovery practices. Review your day. Where did you maintain emotional control? Where did you struggle? What did you learn? This nightly review consolidates learning and identifies patterns you need to address. Also practice gratitude, which research shows significantly impacts emotional well-being and resilience. Throughout your day, maintain awareness of your emotional state. Set reminders to pause and check in with yourself. How are you feeling physically, emotionally? What's the quality of your thoughts? This micro-practice of awareness prevents emotions from building to crisis levels before you notice them. Small course corrections prevent major disasters. Build your life around your values rather than around avoiding discomfort. Most people structure their lives to minimize emotional pain. They avoid difficult conversations, challenging situations, and uncomfortable growth opportunities. This creates a life that's comfortable but small. The emotionally masterful life is structured around meaning and growth, accepting that discomfort is the price of expansion. Regularly evaluate whether your daily activities and relationships align with your values. Are you investing time in what matters most? Are you surrounding yourself with people who support your growth? Are you taking actions that make you proud? If not, what needs to change? These evaluations keep you honest and prevent drift away from your principles. Seek progressive challenges that stretch your emotional capacity. Once you've mastered one level of difficulty, deliberately step up to the next level. This prevents stagnation and builds ever greater resilience. The emotionally masterful person is always operating at the edge of their comfort zone, always expanding their capacity. Maintain strong boundaries around your energy and attention. Say no to commitments that drain you without serving your values. Limit exposure to people and situations that consistently trigger reactive patterns. Protect your recovery time. Guard your morning and evening practices as non-negotiable. Your emotional regulation capacity is a finite resource that must be managed wisely. Cultivate relationships with people who value emotional mastery. Surround yourself with people who are also committed to growth, who call out your reactive patterns lovingly, who model the emotional regulation you're developing. These relationships accelerate your development through mutual support and mirror neuron effects. Continue learning. Read books on emotional intelligence, neuroscience, and practical psychology. Listen to podcasts. Attend workshops. Your understanding of emotional mastery should deepen continuously. New research emerges. New techniques develop. Stay current and integrate useful innovations into your practice. Most importantly, extend compassion to yourself when you fall short. You will have reactive moments. You will lose control sometimes. You will disappoint yourself. This is part of being human. The emotionally masterful response to failure is not self-flagellation. It's acknowledgement, learning, and recommendation. Treat yourself with the same patience and understanding you'd offer a good friend who's struggling. The emotionally masterful life is not a life free of difficulty or negative emotions. It's a life where difficulty and negative emotions don't control you, where you can experience the full range of human feeling without being enslaved by feeling, where you're free to choose your responses based on wisdom rather than compulsion. This is the life available to you. This is the power of not reacting. Conclusion: Your transformation starts now. You've reached the end of this book, but you're standing at the beginning of your transformation. Everything you've read is theoretical knowledge until you put it into practice. The question is, will you? Most people who read books like this never implement what they learn. They understand intellectually. They agree philosophically, but they don't change behaviorally. They return to their old patterns because change is uncomfortable and old patterns are familiar. Don't be most people. You now have a comprehensive system for emotional mastery. You understand the neuroscience. You know the techniques. You have the frameworks. The only remaining question is whether you'll do the work. And make no mistake, it is work. Consistent, sometimes uncomfortable, always valuable work. Start today, not tomorrow. Not after you finish some other project. Not when circumstances are perfect. Today, choose one technique from this book and practice it. Just one. Do it consistently for a week. Then add another technique. Build your practice gradually but relentlessly. Track your progress. Keep a journal of your emotional regulation successes and failures. Watch the patterns shift over weeks and months. Celebrate improvements. Learn from setbacks. Let the data show you that change is happening even when it doesn't feel like it. Share what you're learning with others. Teaching deepens your own understanding. You'll be surprised how many people are struggling with emotional reactivity and desperate for tools to change. By sharing your journey, you help others while reinforcing your own commitment. Remember that emotional mastery is not about perfection. It's about direction. You're not trying to eliminate all emotional reactions. You're trying to progressively increase the gap between stimulus and response, to strengthen your capacity for wise choice, to build a life guided by values rather than feelings. Every moment is an opportunity to practice. Every trigger is a chance to strengthen your emotional regulation neural pathways. Every difficult situation is training for the even more difficult situations you'll inevitably face. Nothing is wasted if you're learning. The power of not reacting is the power to be free. Free from being controlled by circumstances. Free from being manipulated by others' behavior. Free from being enslaved by your own emotional patterns. This freedom is available to you. It's your birthright as a human being with a plastic brain capable of change. But freedom requires courage. The courage to face discomfort instead of avoiding it. The courage to change patterns that have defined you for years. The courage to become someone new. You have this courage. The fact that you've read this entire book proves it. Your emotions are not your enemy. They're information, energy, part of being human. The goal is not to eliminate emotions, but to master your relationship with them, to be able to feel fully without being controlled, to use emotional information wisely while maintaining the freedom to choose your response. This is the life available to you, a life of emotional freedom, a life of wise choice, a life of integrity and power. It starts with a single moment of not reacting, and it's built through thousands of such moments accumulated over months and years until emotional mastery becomes your default way of being. The transformation starts now, in this moment, with this choice. Will you react as you always have? Or will you pause, breathe, and choose your response consciously? The answer to this question determines everything.